All right, good afternoon, everybody. I know it's the getaway day. I appreciate all my colleagues coming out and members of the press here. This is National Corrections Officers Week, right? So that's the occasion. How do we pick today? It's National Corrections Officers Week. Yesterday on the Senate floor, we passed a resolution sponsored by Senator Gallivan to memorialize that to the governor to recognize our COs. And we appreciate the work that our COs and our civilian staff all do. However, it has to call attention to the fact that we still have a corrections crisis in the state of New York. And it's been bothersome for a long time. I represent more correctional facilities than any other state legislator. I'm joined by a lot of my colleagues today that represent COs as well. And of course, as everyone remembers, 14 months ago, there was a CO strike, and they left the strike at the end because they were promised by the governor that there would be significant reviews and improvements to their safety concerns that drove them to the strike. Now, that was 14 months ago. We completed a budget since then. The governor hired Wilmer Hale, the governor and docs hired Wilmer Hale at a cost of $9.3 million in a no-bid contract to conduct a top-to-bottom safety analysis of all of our correctional systems and ask the questions. And as a matter of fact, that was awarded, and it was supposed to be done by the end of last summer. Summer came and went. Last fall, there was a news story on it. I was interviewed myself by Wilmer Hale to share my thoughts on it. And at the time, it was projected then that this report would be released by the end of last year. Here we are, the second week in May, working on the second budget since the CO strike and since Wilmer Hale was hired. And we still don't have that report. My office called this week and said, where's the report? Is it complete? No, it's not. Do you have an estimated completion time? No, we do not. In the meantime, 14 months have happened since this strike, countless incidents, almost too numerous to list, but 25 people in one night at one of my facilities in northern New York, in Malone, went to the emergency room for an unknown exposure. Countless fights, staff have been assaulted, gone to the hospital throughout the state. As a matter of fact, just recently, this past spring, the last couple months, there were 3 inmate murders on other inmates that have occurred in northern New York prisons. So this problem hasn't gone away. We still have a declared state of emergency. Every 30 days, Governor Hochul signs an emergency declaration. The National Guard, 2,500 of them, are still in the prisons to a cost of about $500 million so far. And in the governor's proposed budget that is still being negotiated and still late, she's put in $535 million more to keep the National Guard there. These people are not trained to be COs. They don't want to be COs. So my question is, where's the sense of urgency? We have this tremendous crisis that's ongoing. It's a 14-month-long emergency declaration according to the governor's own signatures. We spent $1 billion. We're about to spend $1 billion on the National Guard. We've had countless numbers of incidents to point to. Where is the urgency? So I wanted to highlight that today because this is Corrections Officers Week. And, it's one thing to tell people thanks, and it passed unanimously in the Senate floor yesterday. Unanimous support for a declaration to thank our COs for the jobs that they do. But in the meantime, it wasn't in the governor's budget. It wasn't in the governor's 30-day amendments, anything to do with corrections. There's nothing to do with fixing the corrections crisis in the Senate one-house bill or the Assembly one-house bill. And from news reports, everyone's talking about what might or might not be in this budget deal, but no one's talking about any fixes to corrections. So by all appearances, it looks like the governor and docs are content with the status quo to have 2,500 untrained National Guard members in our facilities. And in the meantime, the exposures and the violence and the injuries continue, and people continue to go to the hospital. And again, in recent months, 3 inmates have gone to the morgue because other inmates have killed them. So I want to highlight this, and I know that we had a couple bills that were held in committee earlier this week, bills of mine in the corrections facility, or in the corrections committee, and Senator Dean Murray was there to defend those, but one would have addressed HALT, another one would address the contraband crisis. We have been proposing solutions. They're falling on deaf ears with the governor, with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And again, it's been 14 months since that strike ended. We don't have this report from Wilmer Hale. I wonder why. But more importantly, we've seen nothing legislatively or from the governor that's going to do anything to correct the crisis that we've been suffering. So with that, I'd like to turn it over and introduce Senator Dean Murray for his own remarks on corrections. Dean.
Thank you, Senator Steck. Let me start by saying this. Actions speak louder than words. To Senator Steck's point, I serve on the Crime Victims, Crime and Corrections Committee, and we've had several committee meetings this year. In this last one, we did have two bills from Senator Steck, one addressing HALT and one addressing the contraband issue, both voted down by the majority. Let me say this. One of the biggest problems I see is the attitude of this Democrat majority and the message they're sending, not through the words, but through their actions. Yes, this resolution passed unanimously on the floor. And yet, just earlier in the committee, bills that would help protect corrections officers and inmates were shot down by the same Democrat majority. You know, like I said, actions speak louder than words. Earlier this year, in that same committee, we passed the Earned Time Act. I voted against it. I believe Senator Rollison voted against it, but it passed. The Earned Time Act basically gives inmates earned time. As they're in there, they earn their time to cut off of their sentence. But here's the catcher. It is vested. So at the end of the year, whatever they've earned cannot be taken back. They could assault a CO. Doesn't matter. Can't be taken back. They've earned that time. So imagine that. They can assault a CO or another inmate and still get released early. And they build that time up year after year. Actions speak louder than words. I want to say this too. In this last committee meeting during the debate, I was stunned by what I heard. During the debate, I brought up the point that the inmates aren't there because they did something nice or did something right. They're there because they committed crimes. And they should be punished. But when I brought that up, multiple members of the majority wanted to correct me. They needed to put on the record that prisons are for, in their words, rehabilitation. That's it. I almost had to ask again, did we forget that it's about punishment? That it's about consequences? That it's about accountability? Did we forget this? In my opinion, that's what it's for. It's for accountability. It is for punishment. They did something wrong. They did something terrible. And yes, we should do things to rehabilitate some prisoners. Others, I think it's a waste of time. You get an inmate that has sexually assaulted a 5-year-old child. I'm sorry, I don't think they can be rehabilitated. So no. But they sure should be punished. And that's what it's for. And we have corrections officers in there going to work, putting their lives on the line because of the policies and laws that are passed by this Democrat majority. It needs to stop. So to them, to every one of them that voted yes on this resolution and said, we're behind you, I say this, why don't you show instead of talking? And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Senator Pam Helming. Senator?
Thank you, Senator Murray. As you heard earlier this week, we recognize the incredible service of our corrections officers on the Senate chamber floor, and I want to add my personal appreciation to the fantastic work that they do. They are members of law enforcement, but I think because they're hidden behind those four walls that sometimes they're forgotten, but not by the folks who are standing here. It wasn't too long ago that the members of the Legislative Women's Caucus, we met with female corrections officers. And I have to tell you, there are some things that go on here in Albany that really stick with you. That day, hearing those stories of those women, it really stuck with me. They shared some deeply personal things that have happened to them while they're working. And it was, like I said, it stuck with me, and it's been troubling to me to this day that the state hasn't done more to protect the female corrections officers and honestly all of our corrections officers. While I understand the importance of having studies done, we know from meeting with those corrections officers, from touring these facilities, from walking the strike lines and talking to family members and others, what needs to be done. That's why we've introduced legislation to repeal the HALT Act. I have legislation establishing the felony offense of aggravated forcible touching by an incarcerated individual against correctional facility staff. Again, we should not be waiting for these studies to be completed to implement these common sense measures. We need to save people's lives, our corrections officers and the people who are housed inside of these facilities. When it comes to recruitment and retention effort, the state has spent millions of dollars. Actually, I think Senator Steck said $1 billion on the National Guard. I'm a member of a military family, and I certainly appreciate the incredible work of our National Guard members. But that's a short-term measure. The state needs to put in place long-term solutions to doing a better job of recruiting and retaining our corrections officers. It's a tough job, one of the toughest out there. You're stuck working doubles and triples, disrupt your family life. So one of the things that I've proposed is a 20-year retirement plan for our corrections officers. And that's based on, again, these are members of law enforcement. Let's put them on the same even playing field as other members of law enforcement, and let's pass that 20-year retirement plan. Again, we spent over $9 million on a study. We spent billions on the National Guard. Let's invest all that money into our corrections officers and strengthen what we can do for them. At this point, I'd like to turn it back to Senator Steck.
Thank you, Senator Helming. Again, thanks to my colleagues for being here today. Senator Rawlston's our ranking member on the Corrections Committee. Again, I want to emphasize this report. It was supposed to be done by Wilmer Hale last summer. That summer came and went. They pointed to the strike as being one of the things that delayed, or at least that's what the DOC spokesperson said at the time, but that it would be done by the end of the year. It's the second week in May the following year. We're about to hopefully enter the beginning of the end of the beginning of the end of the budget, whatever that means in Albany. But we're 6 weeks late on a budget, and there's been no legislation this year or at the end of last year to really address the root causes and the root concerns by our corrections officers and civilian staff in the workplace. In the meantime, you can't go a week without opening a newspaper and finding another incident where people have gone to the emergency room for unknown chemical exposure. 25 people going to the emergency room in one night in Malone, New York. That's like 1,000 people going to the emergency room in New York City. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to that hospital, it's a big deal to that rescue squad, and it's a big deal to that prison facility. We've had inmates murder other inmates. There's a staffing shortage where there's 3,000 fewer corrections officers working today than before the staff. Docs will tout all the incentives that they're giving, and they're having more academy classes and record numbers in the academy classes. People are still leaving the employment of docs faster than they can replace them. Why? There needs to be an honest reflection in the mirror. We know, and we've been saying it for a long time. Talk is cheap, and I get it, but we're outnumbered. I'm going to spare everyone the civics class, but when you're outnumbered 2-1 in both chambers and the governor and all the same party, they can't even manage to get a budget put together. They haven't done anything to tackle this, and it's really simple. The state of New York has a responsibility to the inmates there and to our own employees. If this was any other employer that had this kind of safety record and nonsense going on, the state of New York would be descending on them like flies, and they'd be issuing subpoenas, and there would be all kinds of investigations. But when it's a prison in New York that we run, the status quo is fine. We'll just let the National Guard continue being there. We'll pass a resolution on Corrections Officers Week thanking them, and we'll continue on our merry way. That is absolutely a failure of leadership, again, at DOCS, in the majorities in the legislature, but mostly the governor. The buck's supposed to stop with her. 14 months since that strike's ended, and nothing has been done. So we'll use this as an opportunity, this Corrections Officers Week, to highlight that and to implore the governor and our colleagues on the other side of the aisle once again to step up and do something, take some sort of action to make things safer in our prisons. And